See, this is what quantum mechanics does to the law of could do to the law of thermodynamics. Normally, the second law says that you have to have two heat sinks, and they have to be at a different temperature for anything to happen. Okay? But quantum mechanics says that even when that is that happens. So if the phase in quantum mechanics takes a predominant role, and when that happens, then you get a change in the actual property of the matter in the system. Now, nobody has really explained well, there's who's the guy with the renormalization? Wilson.
Kenneth Wilson.
Kenneth Wilson. Yes. I mean, that's a very interesting paper, but this is different. No. See, this is this phase conjugate mirror. So this is you have a source of light. It goes down here. It goes into this active medium, which is in this particular case in the logic of it pumped by two lasers. And if you pump it correctly, then the signal goes back and it goes right back to the source. So you have the source and the image of the source coinciding with one another. And that's you know, when I look at this screen here and I put my hand out, that's where I find it.
Yes.
Yes. I find it where it actually is. And if I snap my fingers, I can't snap my fingers. If I snap my fingers, then where do you hear the snap? You hear where the snap was actually made.
That's quite clever, isn't it? And we take it completely for granted.
Yeah, well, no, we think it's done some other way. No, I mean, science doesn't accept my explanation. But this you can demonstrate this in the laboratory. This is the thing about the holographic nature or the fractal nature of the image. But the man who wrote Cassie's, Professor Daniel White at the University of Liège. I don't know whether he discovered this, but if you have a picture there, and then you apply a fractal transformation to it, gradually, at each stage, it gets there and it looks as if it's just noise. And if you keep going, it comes back again. It comes back again. Now, Daniel actually discovered that there was two extensions to recursion. He discovered that with Germano Roscoe. And they discovered incursion and hyperincursion. Now, if you apply, which can be done digitally, okay, it's just a method. It's the way you formulate the equations you want to solve. And if you put down the incursive or the hyperincursive, then even if in the recursion things, if chaos comes into action and the errors multiply, okay? If you do it incursively or hyperincursively, they don't, and you get a stable solution. That's, and he was the one who came up with this idea also of using the fractal equation inside to simulate a single cell, where you could tune this singular cell to have almost any kind of behavior, to simulate any kind of behavior you like, by altering the two parameters in the equation. And it would do it very quickly. So again, you're using something which is considered to be a sort of a curse of the digital computer. That the equations have got regions where they're chaotic, and you're, to some extent, you're using it. You're using it to drive the solution and get it much faster. So now there's another interesting thing. You see, we can use holograms to transfer images. You put a fish in water here, and you bombard it with acoustic waves in a particular way. So not just and it causes a pattern, a holographic pattern to form this, so that when you shine light at it there, you can see the image. So you have transmuted the image from a medium of water into where sound is where sound are the waves to so if you can do that in the laboratory under the right conditions, then there's no reason why it shouldn't happen in your eye. If the light comes in, why shouldn't the brain transmit it and send it back? So it really basically it appears on the back of your visual cortex and is used as part of the process of recognition. Oh, this is the Eccles story about
Back to the beginning.
Let's go back.
Escape if you want to get out.
Oh, escape. Okay.
Press escape at the top.
Oh,
and then the red cross at the top.
Anymore.
The red cross at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And the right-hand corner, the red X. No, the other side.
Oh, on the other side. Oh, she hasn't got all of them on. There are some other files.
You want to do that?
You've obviously got them there.
Oh, no big matter. It's just what you used to.
Oh, it's that one.
That one?
No, just
No.
Yeah.
You want to?
Well, I'm just going to.
I don't know what you're doing. Number two, number two.
No, I just want to go in. Yes. Well,
we carry on with this, because this is what you're doing before. This is the same one you just done.
Is it
Same one of Eurostar. That's by the way, that's an advertisement, if anybody's interested. There's two of my books are on the table outside, and there's Catherine, I don't know what she is. Oh yes, Catherine, so representative from Imperial College Press, which is part of World Scientific, and they publish the books. And there's a third book, and there's a leaflet, if anybody wants, they can get 25% off. The two smaller books are How Schrodinger's Cat Escaped the Box, which is the more popular one, and The Foundations of Physical Law. Yeah, this is yeah, come on.
The last time we held a conference in the Age at Cassis 11. This is the volume that contains the proceedings of the talks that were given at the.
He's not to answer for that cat, doesn't he? There's an awful lot of people that think that quantum computing is all about cats.
Does everybody know the famous joke about Heisenberg and Schrödinger? So Heisenberg and Schrödinger are driving in a car. And they get stopped by a policeman. And the policeman says to Heisenberg, "Do you know what speed you were doing?" And Heisenberg said, "Absolutely no idea, but I know exactly where I was." So the policeman says, "Oh, we've got a wise guy, have we? I'm going to search this car from top to bottom." So he goes into the boot, opens it up, finds a dead cat. Goes to Schrödinger and says, "Did you know there was a dead cat in the boot of this car?" He says, "I do now." So there you are.
Well, you just brought this along because the trouble was that just after this, Daniel's wife, who helped him with all his administrative work for these conferences and producing these journals, couldn't do it anymore. So it's taken until now to get the proceedings.
I've not got them yet. They're probably waiting. They've been waiting for me in Liverpool.
Yeah, they're waiting for you.
Yeah. But that's taken 4 years.
But it's come out, so this is good. So this one's got all about the entropy.
So what's the order now? We have another buffet, is it?
I think, yes.
5 o'clock?
Yes.
Yes, 5 o'clock. It's
yes.
5 o'clock. It's time to.
We could just have a bit of free time for a few minutes.
Yes. We could just have a
just informal chat.
Talk along that topic.
Yeah. Two meetings, or one meeting, 2 halves, or whatever, was really, is that going to support me? Yes, good. Was to talk about this subject of conversion, and therefore it was great to have Peter, you both, to talk about some of the detail, if you like, the scientific detail of theories that actually supported these idea of convergence between the various subjects. And we are aware of quite a number of undergraduates and people of, if you like, the next generation, doing all sorts of different subjects, not necessarily doing computing. And it'd be interesting to discuss some of the ideas that flow from this idea of convergence. Because the more we look at it, the more it appears to us that computing, which we invented, and biogenetics, which I suppose if you take DNA, was more or less, if you like, discovered, if that's the right word, roughly at the same time as the beginnings of computing, and cognitive neuroscience, which I suppose has been going for, Peter, you mentioned Raymond Kejal was the first person to actually isolate a neuron and so on and so forth, and that's about 120 years ago, I think. But it was a subject that was out of fashion for a long time. Only really in the last 10 or 20 years, there's a huge amount of effort gone into trying to understand this thing out here. We've always rather thought that in computing, it started its life as will to a certain extent in a decade apart. And most people for the first 10 years thought of it as the mathematical boxes for mathematicians to play with. And I suppose, really, if you think about it, that's what it's been used for most in the last 50 years or so. But we had a lot of us, I think, had a feeling that there was an awful lot more to computing than just running banks, accounting systems, or credit cards, or even really complicated things like air traffic control. We've learned that we've been able to use computers for more and more and more and more. And that word disruption, we've disrupted an awful lot of industries. And it's having an ever greater effect. And we're very conscious that the media is all full of horror stories. Hollywood, of course, rather like a disaster, some dreadful computer that's got loose and is going to destroy the world, and will the saviour get there? And there's only 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, will he get there? I mean, that's all good stuff. It's all over rubbish. And all this business of artificial intelligence, which has come and gone over the last 50 years, there are people going around talking about the possibility of computers getting so intelligent they're going to take the world over. I think it's always going to be in 20 years' time, isn't it? And it's still another 20 years. But there are really quite senior people in the scientific world talking about, actually, if we aren't careful, computers will get cleverer than us and end up we'll be the slaves and all this sort of stuff. It's also dreadfully pessimistic. And I can't help but think that doesn't really help either ourselves in science and the way, well, computing specifically. It doesn't really help the whole community because it worries people. And especially if you're not too sure if a computer might take your job over. Any of you that came here by taxi, no doubt, as soon as you said you were going to British Computer Society, you got an earful of what Uber was doing to them. And that's another subject. But there are lots of people who are not sure if in the next 5 or 10 years, they'll be told that actually a computer's doing your job now. Which is very difficult. The Bank of England, no less, are actually quite worried about this. They actually asked the Real-Time Club, which is quite a surprise really, to the Real-Time Club, to write a paper on the economic consequences of the computing revolution. For those of you who know economics, of course, it was taking the words of famous remark, the economic consequences of peace. I hope everyone in this room knows who wrote that. Because they're saying, yes, computers may take over an increasing number of jobs, functions, and that sort of thing. But there's another aspect to this. It takes away their purchasing power. Now, at the moment, it's very clearly obvious that absolutely nobody has the faintest idea of what's going on in the world as far as economics is concerned. I'm not just suggesting the Treasury in this country, but very clearly the Treasury in the equivalent of the United States. There's absolutely nobody in Europe who's got the faintest idea of what's going on. Japan, as you know, has been in a recession since 1990, and they've tried everything in the book: dear money, poor, cheap money, free money, collecting money, etc., etc., etc. It's had no effect. And we appear to be following them. And so it actually becomes quite a problem, because maybe what's happening in the computing world is reversing what was created in the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was all about taking an agricultural community that didn't bother to give money, but if anybody earned a bit of money, there was nothing for them to spend it on. And it created people and jobs and purchasing power. And so the whole of economics is based upon that. Now, if computing is gradually taking away that purchasing power, that presents some really serious problems. So there's a lot of people going around and being a bit pessimistic about this. Well, real-time trials a bunch of entrepreneurs, and as you know, entrepreneurs are exactly the opposite. I mean, we're all optimists. As far as we're concerned, you know, the remark about whether something's half full or half empty. As far as we're concerned, it's full. So not just half full. And it therefore struck us it would do too much harm to start talking about the enormous potential advantages that computers are bringing us. And that's the genesis of a series of meetings we're planning and wanting to hold. A word or two on the two subjects of biogenetics and cognitive neuroscience. Because I don't need to repeat everything we were talking about this morning. It's very clear that the computer is not a brain, and then suggested it was. It was probably a bit of a shame back in the 60s that people started using the word electronic brain, because that put everybody off. And of course it isn't. But the actual architecture is remarkably similar. And we've been talking outside this room today. Computing doesn't necessarily give us answers, but it does help us ask questions. How does this work? How does that work? And by looking, as we can, at our computers, because we should tell you, we can see how we organize information, how a computer remembers or memory. It helps us think about what we mean by meaning. We can talk about the various aspects of it, and then try and say, the computer does it that way, how does this do it? And that's very helpful. In biogenetics, we've got a quite remarkable memory system. And we've all seen recently, literally in the last few days, there's this way of actually looking at DNA, using CRISPR, and the P stands for palindrome. It is now possible to divide up the gene into small pieces. We can now actually begin to read DNA like you read a program. And if you can read it, you can edit it. And the implications of that are pretty dramatic. Very big questions if we can use this wonderful technique to cope with illnesses of the hereditary, illnesses of one's got another one. But can we make changes that make people more intelligent? And wow. that we know we can actually do it, there will be people that will do it. And it does make a great deal of difference what the lawmakers decide. The perhaps more important aspect of this is that, to draw a comparison, at the moment, everybody writes programming languages and operating systems, and it's an awful long way from Judo. If you actually were to take a computer and print out a program, it would be extremely difficult to work out what it is with the math. Therefore, it's still extremely difficult to work out how DNA works. The point is, we can now read program. And nearly all science, it starts as science fiction, and everyone's blah. And then someone actually shows you, as you probably know, what's that one for the expression, beam me up, Scotty? Everyone's, oh, that's rubbish. Well, I don't know how many of you have seen teleportation, but I've certainly seen an example of teleportation. Admittedly, it was only transmitting one molecule from one side of the laboratory to another, but it was teleportation. So that is technically possible. It might take a little while before you can actually transmit a person, or even perhaps one cell. So, one has the impression that we're standing on the brink of a huge expansion of human knowledge. And if you look at it, it's almost entirely dependent, that huge expansion, on the fact that we've got computers. Talking about DNA, would we have been able to analyze DNA if it hadn't been for computers? And that's one side of it. The other side is that, thanks to word processors, everybody can publish in papers. And if a publication won't publish them, then you can go and put them on Cornell's archive. File, I'm sure you all know that. The last time I looked, they had 130,000 papers. And luckily we've also got Google for us to hunt down the one who wanted to read. So we've both got the means to communicate from both sides. And that actually hasn't really been true before. If you read Alan Turing's original paper in 1936 to the Royal Society, there are 14 typos, and crossed out and something written in because the secretary made a mistake typing. Presumably there were an awful lot more earlier, and he just gave up on the last 6 corrections, but there were. So there are many ways in which computing is turning our world upside down. Now let's look at it from another point of view. If you look at very nearly every invention that you can think of, going right the way back to the plough, wheel, all the way through to the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines. And interestingly, we built the steam engine before the scientists had any idea of the laws of thermodynamics. Science had to follow the machines. And then, of course, electricity. Every one of them had an effect as a supplement to our muscles. We had these machines that we made to show this morning, Peter, that although you flew in from these, there was no sign of you growing any things. evolution, I suspect, was set rather long before. But there's absolutely no conceivable way, there's no pressure on evolution from our invention. There's no reason why we reject it. Now, if we've had machines of one sort or another, and inventions of that sort, well, for at least 3,000 years. And we had the Olympics, more or less, for 3,000 years. Human beings actually aren't any stronger. You might be able to run a little bit faster, jump a little bit higher, but it's very not. So all our inventions, wonderful as they are, have not actually changed human beings. They have done very, very things for us. And in any sense of criticism, but it's not what computers can do, because computers actually can support, help, whatever word I want to use, our brains. They're the only other machine in existence that can process information. That makes them unique, if nothing else. But already in such a short space of time, we have things like Wikipedia and all the rest of it. We're right on the cusp of having the entire body of human knowledge, art, culture, on our computers, in our pockets, or wearable, in due course, plugged in, the lot. I'm sure lots of people say, yes, well, Wikipedia has got mistakes in it. Well, there are a number of mistakes in the Encyclopedia Britannica that was published 100 years ago. And what was wrong in that was that they stayed wrong for the entire time somebody owned them. With all our electronic systems, of course, we can update them all the time. We can do a lot more now. Because not only have we got raw information, but I'm sure you've all been reading about the online school and university courses. You can now actually watch a video of perhaps the best teacher of a subject actually give a lecture presentation on their subject. Now, that isn't working too well at the moment, but it's a start. As Stanford have done some very interesting work, as many of you I'm sure have seen. And generally speaking, if you watch a video, you come up with a question, you quite understood that. And if in fact you buy your course, you put it on, and you tap in your question, you get the answer from the chap who gave the lecture into it. Now, everyone says, how's that? I mean, that poor devil who gave the lecture is sitting there in Stanford waiting for the questions. But of course he's not. And the computer literate world knows that Stanford can work out what the most likely questions are. And you're asking question 42. Oh, yeah, 42. And so there's question 42's answer, and the system plays it back. But look at the change. We can go further. One thing that the whole of cognitive neuroscience, and certainly the educational community, has never studied, because it's really quite complicated, is that every one of us has got a different type of brain in exactly the same way as everyone has got a different retina. Everyone has got a different brain. And there's a lot of argument that they cluster. It used to be fashionable to talk about left brain, right brain. I think that's slightly out of fashion at the moment. But there is a lot of solid evidence that some people are much happier, as it were, thinking in mathematical terms or logical steps because they're more comfortable that way. And there are other people who, one might argue, are more on the literate side, tend to think, we would say, more like an analog, because they think in terms of, if they're writing something, the emotional effect of what they write. And there are a lot of people in the middle of it, and maybe not necessarily one thing or the other. But there's no doubt that there are different types of brain. We can now, therefore, write MOOCs. It's a terrible word, isn't it? What's it go? Multiple online, what's the next systems for these online systems. You'd think we could think up something better than the word like MOOCs, but still. You can actually write them now for different types of, if it's children learning maths, or if it's older people learning whatever they do. So you can actually, if it suits some people who are learning to, or students at any age, you can actually write the course to suit the way they like to think. And if they like to think in the traditional way, if it's written on the blackboard and they can see it, fine. For the other lot, maybe you have cartoons, and you have your favourite cartoon of your favourite character, who says, "Hi Charlie, what are you doing today? Let's all do so and so, what about who, etc., etc., etc." If that's the way they like to learn best, great. There's a lot in the paper at the moment about the fact that British are illiterate, or young people are illiterate, which of course are very rubbish. There's an interesting experiment that's going on, I believe, in Finland, where one teacher, I understand, has a class from the first day the kids go to school right through to whatever they have in place of GCSE. Because they reckon that means that we can see it in Egypt, some potential advantages. What about the kid that doesn't get along with his teacher? Now, all of us have to suffer school at one time or another for a longer or shorter period. And there were teachers that you felt comfortable with. And there were teachers that you, oh God, what are they doing? And if you got on with the teacher, it was amazing how much better you were at that subject, etc., etc. If you didn't get on, you didn't. Now, that is something that the educational world really don't like, because they say that a professional teacher must be aware of this and therefore compensate for that. Or maybe it would be much more sensible, I think. I've always thought it would be much more fun if children selected their teachers, as in fact people do, for learning. If they're learning music or something, they go along and find a teacher that can teach them the piano. Yes. Much better if young people, the teachers all line up and explain how they would teach maths, and the young people say, well, I think you teach me best. That's quite a long way away, I think, from the views of Her Majesty's government. It's right, it's me, it was me. But let's go on to how can we use our computers to actually help us and succeeding generations use our brains better. Because even though we've got the internet, we've got Wikipedia, we've got Google and all that stuff, They are, to a certain extent, still tools, aren't they? We use them to do whatever we want to do. Great, wonderful, huge step forward. Can we go further? Now, if we look at the problem of learning, there are 4 steps. First of all, there's information, isn't there? I'm going to learn anything unless we actually have some information to learn. That must be the first step, acquiring information. Second step is how do we remember that information? Because if we can't remember it from one day to the next, we aren't going to get very far. The third is, it's quite possible for us to remember things without understanding their meaning. There are plenty of people who can recite whole strings of words. I think they just don't know what they mean. So there's actually meaning. And then there is one step further, being able to use that information to learn something new. I'm interested to know how many people, when they were at school, and I was hoping there would be more students here to answer this question, how many people nowadays are taught at school how to remember? Oh, good. Well, you did. Oh, well, I mean, extremely relieved to hear that. I noticed that quite a number of other people who haven't. And it might be that you went in the United Kingdom. And I would argue that the first thing you need to do after you taught people to read and write is how actually do I remember things? Because my brain is different to everyone else in the class. So let's look at those 4 things. How can computers inform studies? Well, the information bit isn't so difficult, is it? Because there's this cornucopia of knowledge. If people are curious to pick up information from another, and of course there's the television and all the rest of it. I think the younger generation knows more about the natural world now than anyone else in history, probably thanks to Attenborough more than anybody else. And those programs are very wonderful. And when you're sitting watching David Attenborough describe something to do with elephants, you learn an enormous amount without actually having to think about it. Of course, that's the best way to learn. So I would argue that the younger generation today are probably better educated than any time in history. So actually picking up the information is difficult. I think we should actually spend some serious time working out what information actually is, defining what information is, where it comes from, how we process it, and actually, as I said, to define information. Which, curiously, you'd think, well, that's dead easy, in facts and things. And then you start looking, and it turns out to be remarkably complicated. But that's relatively easy, and computers are doing that job. Memory. Now, how do we remember? What actually goes on in our brains to take in information so that we can store it in such a way that when someone asks us a question, we can recall it? And there are many, many theories, all known centuries, as to how to do this. Because people have, since the beginning of writing, I suppose, written on record, people have realized that to be able to remember information is absolutely key. The oldest example I'm aware of, from about 300 is 500 BC, known as the system of loci, which I imagine you all know. It's always put in sort of slightly apocryphal terms that this guy was having a party, dinner party, and was called out by two gods, I suppose, who told him to come away from the party, whereupon the roof fell in, killed everybody at the party. And he was able to tell everyone the next day the names of everybody at the party, like where they sat around the table. And since then, every generation, Cicero had a wonderful way, which is well published, of when he was making a speech, he had a series of keywords to remind him to say, etc., etc. It sounded pretty obvious. It probably wasn't until someone did it, then it was obvious. And all through history, there's a rather good example from the Middle Ages, where somebody or other was promoting a scheme that was related to various sexual things he did with his girlfriends, and he got told off by the Pope, because that really wasn't the right sort of way in which Roman Catholics should remember things. If we come up to the present day, of course, there's lateral thinking. John Stuart Mill came up with his various theories, and there are all sorts of people who've come up with theories. Now, one of the most interesting things of all these ideas, how can we find shortcuts and ways to help us learn? One of them is, as you're walking along the street, you think on that house, that's the first thing that you remember, and it's the second thing, and so on and so forth. And then when you get to the supermarket, you remember the first house that was sugar, and the second house that was butter and butter, etc., etc., etc. That's a little bit frivolous, but those sorts of theories people put forward. Now, when people put those ideas forward, believe them. And usually they're very strong characters. And they say, use my system, and you will never forget anything again. And they enthuse people. And they all have charisma. And they believe it. They really believe it works. And their acolytes, and the people they persuade, believe it, and it works. It really does work for them. And they pass it on to other people, and it sort of gets diluted. And after about a couple of generations, what's the system that works? And there's a huge amount of evidence for that. It isn't just a minor phenomenon. I think that teaches us quite a lot about how the memory system works. Because, as we're all well aware, the brain is only a very small piece of our whole bodies, and we've touched on the immune system and various other things earlier today. There's the whole autonomic system which runs the shop. I think, Peter, it was you who mentioned that the brain does a large amount in the background, which, and as a result, we touched on the subject of consciousness and whether things were done. So I can put that on one side. The point is that our system is working all the time, flat out, managing the system. And in fact, the brain really only, one would argue, evolved to coordinate everything. It's only an information processor because it is organizing everything we do. Slightly different from a computer, which can only process information, and there's no connection to anything else. So, the way it seems that we learn is that a lot depends on how important that information is to us. If there's a crisis, and we badly need to remember something, we'll remember it. If it doesn't matter whether we do, we don't, we may or may not. Recall, if there's a crisis, and we need this information, and it really is a real crisis, we can't invent it, then the chances of us recalling something is far greater. Repetition, partly. We know that every time that we use a network, we strengthen it. In due course it gets insulated, myelinated, the synapses get stronger, the network gets bigger all the time. So that's by repetition. How do we create a memory for the very first time? I touched on this morning, but there is a theory that if you've got two neurons firing more or less at the same time, they link up. Don Head put that for you, and it came up with a rather nice short thing. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Uses an electromagnetic field. If two electromagnetic fields overlap, that magnetic field is strong enough to attract some clear cells, and you've got it. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. It hasn't been proven. Messenger molecules whizzing about can connect up a neuron over there to a neuron over there. IBM has just come up with a quantum possibility that was in the literature so far sometime this year, where two, I think it was potassium ions were connected to the and maybe that encouraged a link to get made. So a number of ways now.
I can think of another one,
Go on.
which comes from the relay system. You attach a label to the memory.
Yep.
I guess that's the, and then you remember the thing.
So you remember the labels rather than the
Well, it gives you a handle.
An index.
It gives you a handle.
Yes.
On both.
Yes. Now, if we in fact have, how can our computers directly help us? Well, first of all, we would say we need the information. But now we can begin to use the fact that we can select out what we want to follow up very easily. And to oversimplify it, I think, we can begin to use our neural brains as forms of index, which is, I think, almost exactly what you were saying, Peter, to potentially let's say silicon brains, or well, by that time I think it did something other than silicon, but to make the point. And there is a precedent for that. Roughly 3,000 years ago, was it? Writing turned up. I'm sure you all have seen a quote by, it's supposed to be Socrates, and may have been him, who was very worried about the invention of writing. Because if people could write things down, they wouldn't have to remember them. So the human brain would become irrelevant. Now that sounds to me like one of the schoolmasters at the school I went to. Oh, sorry. They're nice enough. Over my dead body, are we going to have this writing? Well, to a certain extent, of course, we will use our brains as the index to our books. And I think most people would agree that writing was probably quite a good thing. So I think we're looking at potentially something similar. Now, meaning. What do we mean by meaning? Again, you can look it up in the Oxford English Dictionary, and that really helped a lot. And what it may mean, as far as we're concerned, as far as our brains are concerned, is that if we have one single piece of information, and let's argue we have one neural network, oversimplified. Every time we think about that again, we think of it in the context of some other context. So there's a link to something else we thought about. And again, that came up this morning. So every time we start thinking of a particular subject, we start building up connections to other things. The one's foot is part of one's leg, one's toe is part of one's foot, one's leg is part of one's body, etc., 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 etc. And so we are permanently building up links. So those trillion new links and structures that we grow as we cease to mature are connections to all the other things that are associated with one particular piece of information. So when someone mentions a subject, whatever it is, all the other networks run are stimulated. So there's a whole raft of other pieces of information that are available. So we begin to get a context for that single piece of information. And the more the links, the more, if I could put it away, more meaning something has to it. That links in to the way that all of us experience learning. I guess nearly everyone in this room can ride a bicycle, or drive a car, or swim. And thinking about that, the first time I got on a bicycle, or the first time I got in a car, I was all over the place. The bicycle was doing this, and fell off. And you got in the car and pressed all the wrong buttons and it stalled. And gradually, you managed to move your feet in the right sequence until you got to the point where you could drive a car more or less on autopilot. You got in the car, turned on, put it in gear, drove off, and you didn't think in the slightest bit about changing it. You did it quite automatically. Or you got on a bicycle and you rode off. You didn't think, now wait a minute, I'm sliding that way so I could do it. You did it entirely automatically. Now, what we found there, I suggest, is of course grow the circuit. That when you said bicycle, the circuit works out your ending one way or the other, and then automatically moves the handlebars. And autopilot is quite a good level. All of you who can drive motor cars know perfectly well you could be driving along, talking to somebody else, and perhaps it appears that you aren't paying attention. If something happens, bang, and you're immediately back moving out of the car and you stop talking to that's the next one. That, of course, is how we learn to speak when we're 1 year old, 2 years old. The system struggles. Watch one's children, watch one's grandchildren, struggling to get words out. And then they get it right, and everyone goes, oh gosh, that's wonderful. Even sweet, it is. So it does that. So we actually grow the circuits. And therefore there's absolutely no reason at all why we shouldn't actually be able to think in terms of a prosthetic brain that we can literally plug in due course 50 years away. An awful lot of you will be here in 50 years, I hope. To actually help with these processes to build up those knowledge banks, those information banks. And then we tend to learn to use our neural brains as the index to pick up this sort of information. Now, where people actually do something under autopilot, I would argue that is what is called intelligence. Peter, again, to quote you, I think, where the brain automatically responds to a situation, to incomplete information, as fast as possible. And that's how we survive. That's intelligence. And the last thing, just 1 minute. What then matters is what you do with the information that you own. You've passed all your exams because your memory was excellent, etc., etc. You're moving on now to use that information to push forward the frontiers of science. In other words, thinking, which is completely different, I would argue, from intelligence. That's why artificial intelligence has wonderful fits and starts and things, but never gets anywhere because it muddles up intelligence and thinking. That is where we come up with something completely new. Whether a computer can help us with that, I don't know. That's probably always going to be in the province of this thing. So I don't hallucinate sleep at night about all these robots that are going to take over. Because we make the damn things. What we can, if we make them, and we program them, and we build them, and they start misbehaving, then we'll just come up with something a bit cleverer and put them out of business. Looking over the scope of what's possible over the next, not 5 years or 10 years, but maybe over the next 10 or 20, we're going to be able to use our computers to do something we've never, ever, in the whole history of civilization, been able to do before. We're going to be able to understand better. We're going to be able to use our brains better. Whether we're more intelligent or not remains to be seen. I think it's a very brave person that reckons they're more intelligent than Aristotle and Plato, but maybe. But that is something that is a real game changer. Now, I'm going to hand over to my mate Max to talk about two things. Where already synthetic biology is already doing things, and I've been fascinated to learn a great deal. I didn't know so much was going on. And the potential for a little bit further down the line to have precision. Great, thanks.
Do you want to do some questions?
We can, whichever you prefer. Ask a question now, or next talk for it, then we can. And I thought what we do is, if you'd like to talk for a little while now, I thought we spend the rest of the time on questions, whichever you prefer.
Does anyone have anything
very specific at the moment? I mean, anything to throw at me? Max?
Thank you.
I think I really want to see.
Thanks very much, Rob. I know it is growing late in this slightly airless room, so I'll do my best not to talk for too long. But thank you very much for the introduction, Charles. I think I might take a slightly different tack for 10 or 15 minutes. So for those of you who were there this afternoon, and those of you who've just arrived for tonight's session, a sensation you might be beginning to get is that traditionally computers and living things have been seen as entirely separate. You know, computers are made of silicon, they're not alive. Living things are made of cells. Cells and silicon are not the same. The living world, such as it is just entirely separate from computers. And if they ever converged, if they ever had anything to do with each other or interfaced, it would be at the level of, say, artificial intelligence. You know, computers come from one place, we come from another, and somehow we're kind of combining the two. From my perspective, which is that of a biologist, I'm going to try to introduce you to the idea that maybe, far from being separate now, far from ever having been separate, the idea of a computer and the idea of a living thing might actually be one and the same. And I'm fascinated, and I hope I can impart a bit of that to you guys as well, by the idea that now the more we learn about computers, and the more what we know about computers allows us to learn about living things, we're actually coming full circle and seeing that we ourselves as living things are a type of computer. And the computers that we've invented, the digital computers that we use day to day, they're really not so different from us at all. Yeah, so cast your mind across the Atlantic to Boston, and then even further from Boston to the West Coast, to Silicon Valley, and down to San Diego, where lots of cool stuff is happening. Boston's probably colder than here right now, but I'd much rather be in San Diego. I heard it was about 70 degrees there this morning. In any case, there's lots of people there who, around about 20, 30 years ago, started giving birth to this fascinating field that I work in called synthetic biology. One of the biggest champions of the field throughout this time has been a guy called George Church. You might have heard of him. He used to work with Craig Venter, one of whose books is sitting outside. George Church is an enigmatic man. He has an enormous beard, kind of this big. He's larger than life, he looks a bit like Santa Claus. He appears on the news every so often in the States. He's a bit of a celebrity. And his lab of about 100 people is really driving forward some of the most amazing things within SynBio. So what is SynBio? Different people have different opinions, but to me, synthetic biology is the idea not of using biology to understand living things, which is what we've done for a long time. We might look at how an animal works, how evolution works, maybe how a broken human works and how we can fix it. That's medicine. Synthetic biology is the idea of using what we know to build entirely new living things. It's the idea of taking living parts, whether those are cells, DNA, other molecules, or whole tissues, and using them to build things, just like an engineer takes steel and bricks and mortar and builds things, or an artist takes different kinds of media and designs something. The fundamental idea of synthetic biology is that by treating biological parts with the same rigor that engineers treat engineering parts, we can apply engineering principles and actually make things. The problem, you might be able to see pretty quickly, is that all of this assumes you can treat biology like engineering parts. And sadly, you can't stick cells together as easy as you can stick Meccano together. But we're kind of getting there. And the big thrust of SynBio in the labs of people like George Church is to reduce biology as best we can to different kinds of parts. For example, there's a big initiative called the BioBricks program, where they're trying to take genetic elements, the things that encode pretty much the way we look, everything that we do, all the behaviors of a cell. They're trying to break those down into bricks in the hope that they can put those bricks together to build new things, things which have never existed before, just the way an engineer does for whoever. Even better, the application of engineering principles means that unlike normal biology, where you might think of a new organism, build it and see if it works, we can do what an engineer does, which is build a bridge in a computer, test it, run a car over it in a computer, and if the bridge collapses under the weight of a car, go back and design a new bridge. The hope of SynBio is that we can develop complex and intelligent enough computational models of living organisms that we'll never have to build them and discover our mistakes, but we can discover what works and what won't before we ever turn to the wet lab and start pipetting chemicals and incubating yeast, that kind of thing. So it's a very hopeful science. It's a science that makes lots of promises. There's much more than one larger-than-life bearded man in Boston or San Diego. But these people are really pushing it forward, and that's why it's so exciting. So there's one aspect where you might begin to see how we can use computers to do biology. But I'm not sure I've yet answered that question I put to you right at the beginning, which is whether computers and biology really are the same thing. So to take a step back and introduce myself, I'm Max Jamley. I study SynBio at Oxford. Even though I don't have a massive beard, it's still what I do. Maybe I'm working on it. Within SynBio, as well as applying engineering and doing genetics, we're really interested in using DNA as a computing device. So if you think about a virus, a virus is essentially a computer. What do computers have? They've got hardware and software, Another model of computer architecture says they have kind of memory, an input-output unit, and something like a bus that combines the memory with the input-output. Now let's look at a virus. It's got DNA, which is essentially the software. It encodes the program of what the virus will do when, say, it infects one of your cells. It's got hardware, There's the coating around the virus. There's the DNA itself, which supports the code. There's other hardware inside you that the virus might hijack, In the same way that someone might kind of come and plug their USB stick into your computer and use your hardware. And then we've also got this bus. We've got this process of transferring the software onto the hardware, which is more of the kind of biological machinery that the virus uses. So, not just in a kind of theoretical way, but in a genuine sense, a computer can be found in a virus, There's really no difference other than electricity, the normal notion we apply to modern computers, that separates something like a virus from something like a laptop sitting over there. And it's with that in mind that I myself in Oxford do a lot of work on DNA computing. So DNA, as I've already said, can hold a sequence. It's really good at that. And because we can program DNA, we can essentially start to get it to do anything that we like. On one level, we can put bricks together in the SynBio sense, and if one brick says do this function, another brick says do this function, when we put both bricks in a cell together, it should do those two functions. And it's no longer a dream, it's reality, that within SynBio we can build cells that respond to conditions in the body, and maybe in response to the presence of the malaria parasite, they can synthesize a malaria drug and release it in the right place. We can build cells that target tumors in the body and release a drug only when the tumor is active. We can build cells that detect bad toxins in the environment, but not the nutrients that plants need to grow, and destroy those toxins. So we're beginning to develop cells using SynBio that can do computation. But if we go another level down, even kind of more abstract, we don't actually need to use DNA inside cells at all if we want to do computing with it. We can use DNA in a soup, we can use DNA in a test tube, and use it to make calculations. Since the late 90s, when first a gentleman called Leonard Edelman and then some Israeli groups used DNA to calculate square roots, we've been using DNA, the molecule, nothing more, to do really, really complex computation. I'm not going to explain now how the molecule of DNA can calculate something like a square root. I might ask you to take that on trust for now, but I'll happily kind of chat to anyone about it afterwards. But the idea is that DNA is so small and molecules do what they do so quickly, even compared to computers, that combinatorial problems can be really efficiently solved by DNA. And there's nothing special about DNA. It's just a molecule which happens to do this convenient base pairing thing of having a sequence in one code, in one strand, which is matched by basically the same sequence in the opposite strand. But beyond that, DNA is just a chemical. It's a very small chemical, it's a very stable chemical, and it's a chemical that's really easy to make. But other than that, yeah, it just happens to be the chemical that we find in most living things. And it happens to be a really great way of doing computation. So it might all seem a bit far-fetched now. Let me tell you that first DNA square root experiment, for example, took about a week, yeah? And that was to calculate like the square root of 4 or something. This is pretty basic, but that was 20 years ago. Nowadays, there are DNA parts which replicate all of the logical gates, Boolean logic that you find in electronics. So I can basically look up in a catalogue and order a not and DNA part. I can order an OR gate. I can put them together and build systems with transducers. I can build complicated stuff. And the promise kind of is unlimited in that sense. One of the most exciting things about DNA and DNA storage is that, unlike electronics, it's very unlikely to go obsolete as well. So when we talk about this kind of computer, I can guarantee that if I show you that thing in 10 years, it'll
fall down.
Exactly. It'll look like an antique. You know, I'm sure lots of you have at home data stored on VCR. I know that I definitely don't anymore have the hardware I need to read that VCR. Yeah. DNA, on the other hand, we've proven that it's stable for about 60,000 years because we can extract DNA from a woolly mammoth. Lab results suggest if kept in the right conditions, it'll last for about 1 million years. Add that to the fact that we can make millions of copies of DNA in a space smaller than a single transistor on the latest microchip. And you've got a really, really reliable storage system and computation system. Even more exciting, DNA will never go obsolete because as long as we're around, then each of us contains exactly the hardware, exactly the machinery that you need to read DNA. So, in many senses, I see it as the ultimate kind of computational system, and potentially the future for the way that we understand not just computing, but also biology. So, to summarize what's perhaps a little bit rambling, I hope that's begun to give you the sense, and maybe we can discuss it a bit more right now, it's begun to give you the sense that computers and biology are the same thing. In that a computer is something that does logic to solve a problem, biology really does that. We invented computers kind of in our image, without wanting to use that phrase in any specific way, and we can now go back into our biology and develop biological computers instead. That comes out of synthetic biology, it comes out of DNA computing, but these are just kind of areas in science. That'll change, the principle remains the same. And personally, it's a principle that I'm really excited about, and hopefully one that excites some of you as well. Yeah. Thank you. Shall we have a bit of a discussion? Does anyone have any questions about what Charles said, or the more squidgy side of computers that I discussed?
I have a question next. I think it's generally accepted that if you put a bunch of components together, then the system of the total has properties of that. You saw a handout earlier about an organisation called CASIS, and the hero behind that is a guy called Robert Rosen, who spent his entire life trying to think about what is making up a living system at a holistic level. So I'll buy your argument that you can make bits, logic gates and stuff like that, but do you believe that you understand in a holistic sense what is life?
No.
Okay.
In a word.
Okay.
At the moment, it would be a fallacy to say that we even understand current living systems well enough yet to know whether a novel system that we make really is the sum of its parts or not.
Okay.
This fascinating guy, Craig Venter, whose book I spoke about earlier, he's involved in the Minimal Genome Project, this idea of finding out the minimal number of bricks that you need to put together genetically to make life. And the hope was that by getting rid of all the bricks you didn't need, and then putting all the bricks that remained together, we could really understand what life was. And exciting and successful as his work was, we still don't understand why we need all of the bricks that we seem to need. So, in that sense, we don't understand what it is that underlies why most of the things that are alive. Yeah. Now, there's still a lot of contention about what it means to be alive anyway. But kind of putting that aside, it doesn't actually matter too much. Whether or not people are agreed on whether something is alive or not, if we build a system that works, then it works, and great. It'll be more efficient if we know why they work, because that will enable us to predict if the systems we build will be good or not. But until then, we can kind of just plunge on blindly without really knowing what life is, and find out along the way.
But in a way, your use of the word "it works" is an engineering attitude of I define what it works means. But in the sense of something alive, we have the vaguest idea what it works really means. At the holistic level, right? Something which can reproduce, for example,
Yes.
and so on, which is usually regarded as one of the minimal requirements, right? And then there's another one which is to do with information and all that stuff. So, anyway, thank you for your answer.
I read a while ago that they, from synthesized DNA into an already living cell that was reduced in components, they were able to put it together. Have they been able to, as yet, synthesize the components from scratch? Like, totally man-made building blocks of the whole cell and make a function? Not yet.
No. Probably what you're talking about is, again, J. Craig Venter's work. They rather boastfully called the organism Synthia, and get this, much of the DNA that they synthesized and put into this like empty shell of a cell was the researchers' names and J. Craig Venter's book. I kid you not. So this guy definitely has a big head on his shoulders. But to answer your question, no. The tough bit is the proteins, it's all the rest of it. At the moment, what we can do is make entirely novel programs. That's to say, we can synthesize DNA from chemicals in the lab, but we then have to put that in a pre-existing cell and use nature's pre-existing protein hardware to turn the software into a function.
If you were to say how the science around that is progressing, I mean, is it plateauing? Is it making progress? Like,
it's definitely making progress. Designing proteins is really difficult, but the big protein that everyone's talking about and has been for the last year or so is CRISPR-Cas9. It's this genome editing thing. And it's interesting to everyone, and rightfully so, because it lets you take an existing cell and change its genome in a really targeted way. It's like a magic wand that lets you point at, a big book and do like a find and replace really reliably throughout the whole book. But even cooler about CRISPR is the way that they came up with it. It's a protein, a really clever protein that does stuff, and most of it was designed in silico. It was designed by researchers in computers. So we can already decide what proteins do, and sometimes, as in CRISPR, we can even actually turn it into reality. But our designs are nearly always inspired by nature at the moment. So there's a lot more work to do until we can just pull proteins out of thin air. Maybe we don't need proteins at all, we can do it with another chemical entirely.
Do you have any what you might call focused outputs? I'm thinking of your work supporting what would be nice if we could manufacture photosynthesis?
That's very interesting. Not yet. There's lots of groups working on photosynthesis. Both people trying to do it entirely artificially, which is make other chemical systems manufactured in the lab that capture light, basically as a super efficient self-replicating type of solar power. I've been involved in some work related to taking the existing photosynthesis and all the existing complicated hardware surrounding it and making it better. Because, again, photosynthesis is a computer program, and the set of steps that it follows were written by the worst programmer there is, which is evolution. Evolution is a greedy and lazy and pretty shoddy programmer who pulls together everything she can find, and when it gets to 4 in the morning and it ends up working, evolution just stops. And now that we've got slightly more focused kind of ambitions, we can definitely improve on what evolution has done, and SynBio gives us the ammunition to be able to do that.
Do you have people in the team who understand quantum theory? Because it seems that photosynthesis works because of... You do?
I can't say I do.
No, I don't know. I mean,
I can't say I do. But yeah, lots of physicists are working on this problem. Like superposition within photosystems is something that would have been so obvious to physicists 20 years ago if only, you know, a biologist had walked up to them at a party and told them, kind of thing. And one of the great things about synthetic biology is that these figures like George Church, who started off in physics, Craig Ventnor was a computer scientist, another man called Tom Knight, who runs one of the biggest SynBio companies, Ginkgo, also started off as a computer scientist. It's a really interdisciplinary field. I spend most of my day with engineers, not biologists, you know, which has its ups and downs. But scientifically, it's a great thing.
I'm actually delighted to hear that there's something that is a worse programmer than me. Quite big naive in that.
I'm surprised you could say that, because you're in the real-time club and you can't have this spaghetti code if you're in real time, right? Well, you couldn't anyway at the beginning when there was so little power going around. You're being too modest, I think.
Oh no, I'm actually not. First day that I got into computing, I was given a manual that was written in mathematics terminology. I didn't understand the contents page.
I feel like that when I'm reading Science of Nature.
And I think the first program I'm trying to write was the Turing thing, you put something in, change it, and put it out. And exactly difficult. But for those of you that can remember programming in machine code, if you did make a mistake, you usually made 4 mistakes correcting it. Now that's not very good statistics.
I think Microsoft have passed the point where if you make a change, it explodes and you have to throw it away.
Yeah.
And you come up with a new release and spend a lot of money.
That should help. So I thought probably the best plan was either to get out of programming quick or write a trace routine. And that was much more fun. Anyway, sorry about that. But there we are. So that is actually true. But far rather have some questions.
Well, I must say I disagree with the view that evolution is the worst program. I think it's the best.
I didn't say that. You did.
No, he thinks it's the best program. I mean, if it's the worst programmer and you're using DNA, then you're using the worst material to...
Aha, that's a really interesting point. Sorry, you want to finish?
No, well, then it's a paradox.
I take exception with, first of all, to say it's the worst program is kind of a slightly sloppy thing to say, but I do stand by the statement that evolution doesn't seek for global optima, it doesn't find the best thing ever. it finds the nearest best fit as far as a
it finds
solution.
a thing that will work at the time.
It finds one thing that will work, yeah, but not necessarily. If you're in the Himalayas and you're looking for high ground, you won't necessarily end up on Everest. You might end up on a nearer mountain, and you might be stuck on that mountain such that actually if you want to get to the peak of Everest, you're going to have to descend into a valley. But regardless of that, just because evolution might be good or bad, that doesn't reflect on the material it uses. The best and the worst programmers might both program in C++, whatever. But I still think that there's nothing special about DNA. And that's maybe where, for me, the universal rewrite language type idea might have to apply to the process that produced DNA.
Well, that's
and
what
the reason
we
that
think.
DNA exists, yeah.
We
Rather
don't,
than DNA
we don't
itself.
think DNA itself is special.
Sure.
It's the process. And it's just picked whatever chemicals it could at the time. And it could have been something totally different.
Exactly. And
Well, it does happen. It replaces thiamine with uracil, for example, in places.
Yeah.
It does happen.
And all of that stuff is probably because way back when, before life even existed in cells, DNA didn't exist at all. There was this other chemical called RNA that did everything. If DNA is like the blueprint, then RNA is like the photocopy of the blueprint, and the proteins are the building that the blueprint builds. But RNA is both a memory store and a bus and a kind of memory transfer thing, because it's also catalytic. It doesn't just define the program, but it also makes the program happen. So there are lots of different ways that computers can
We
work.
don't privilege DNA over RNA.
Yeah.
It's the whole process involved.
I wouldn't privilege either of them
Yeah,
over
we don't.
anything else.
But also,
it's just one system.
I would say having a universal rewrite system doesn't exclude that being also compatible with computers as we know them.
Yes.
Because we've said that it was. We weren't trying to do something that wasn't. We're trying to do something that was inclusive,
Sure.
including computing as we know it.
Mm.
So
I think they're one and the same thing.
yeah,
Very
well,
much.
well, we don't think they're different.
Yeah.
It's part of the same process. So we agree on that.
I think the very last thing I'd briefly mention is that, again, on the theme of the lovely leaflet you've got in your seats, which is brain, mind, computer convergence. I think Charles touched on the very highest level of brain-computer convergence, which is artificial intelligence. It's kind of me plugging my mind into a robot. And what I've been rambling on about is maybe the lowest level of brain-computer convergence, the idea that brains are built up of systems which follow the same laws as digital computers anyway. But if Charles's method is kind of the gondola that goes over the Thames and mine is the tube train that goes underneath the Thames, maybe the one in the middle, the riverbed, is stuff like neural networks. And there's a lot of work in the last year or so showing that you can basically plug organisms together. You can take, say, 3 individual rats and essentially, either physically or remotely, wire up their brains to each other. You're taking biological computers and building them up into a digital computer. And I think if there's any kind of low-hanging fruit among those 3 levels, it's probably in the middle one. It's probably the brain net thing. If I had to say that like something within the next 10, 20 years will really amaze us, I think it's likely to come from that middle area of literally, unpleasant maybe as it sounds, taking like 2 or 3 monkeys, as we can already do, and get them together to solve a problem with their brains subconsciously linked that a single monkey couldn't solve on its own. To me, that's kind of sci-fi and amazing. But I think the brain net is maybe the medium between what we're saying, which will be super exciting.
I was wondering if we did discover life somewhere else, whether it would have the same overall plan, but would have different chemicals in it. Just like a convergent evolution idea again, whether that would happen. So So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But I think I read a book by Simon Conway Morris in which he argued, whether correctly or not, that there's virtually no other chemical that would work. Now, I don't know whether I believe that, but that's what he argued.
I think there are other chemicals which will work,
Yeah,
so to me that's not correct.
I think that very probably, well, we already know that there's two chemicals that work for one of the bases. So I think it's very probable that they would. And in that case, if we discover life elsewhere, it would probably be formed out of different chemicals.
I don't see why, I mean, it would be an incredible cosmic coincidence if it was formed from the same thing, to me.
But it may well have the same plan.
Oh, yeah, the same present.
Yeah.
It might
There's certainly been things done on the to show that you can have optimal control of chemical reactions, and it has to be quantum mechanical, or it has to be done with lasers.
No, I think the fundamental kind of physical laws, whatever they may be, that underlie all of these systems are the same. And I mean, that's essentially why, like, from an information flow perspective, there's no way that what a computer does could be different to what a cell does. It just depends how far you want to abstract.
Actually, a very interesting point there that if you go back in history, as far as we understand it, the original eukaryote cells, if I've gotten the right way around, were individual cells to start with, and cells began to come together for mutual support and defense and all the rest of it, gradually making what we would call organisms, because the enormous advantage was they could specialize. So we end up with eye cells and bone cells and everything else. I suppose what is in prospect, which is almost exactly what you were saying, if we can, to a certain extent, put human beings together. I mean, Skype, in theory, everybody thought that would be absolutely wonderful. I don't know, perhaps it's me, but I don't find it anything like as good as I was hoping it was going to be. If you get a group of people together to try and think together, I quite like the idea of bringing three monkeys together. And I suppose, my rather trivial remark, one was, we did have somebody in the cabinet a little while, we had two brains.
Well, Willits, David Willits.
David Willits, yes. So there's everybody going down, that was great, but they didn't communicate. Sorry, my sense of humour is disaster.
He was science minister.
Yeah, exactly, he was science minister. Yeah.
Didn't know any science, but he was science minister.
That's right, yes, yes. And he was sacked, he was quite sure which brain got sacked. One has the idea that the potential that we could do with human beings, that if we could link our brains together, we could solve some of the problems that we sure find difficult to solve in other worlds we've got at the moment. And so many of these things, so many ideas over the last couple of centuries or so started off as science fiction, and everyone fell out laughing. Oh, how can it be possible? It's the role of science fiction, of course, to plant ideas in people's minds. And then people start saying, well, wait a minute, why do we do that? Now, of course, as we've been saying all today, we are beginning to understand a little bit more all the time. And that would be a tremendous step forward if we could link brains together to the point where we can come up with better solutions.
Completely different type of question. You mentioned at the beginning of your talk that you were planning a series of meetings.
Ah, yes.
Could you just talk about
Well, I am glad you raised that subject because I mentioned the real-time chart, which is a precarious sort of organisation that the only thing we are surprised about it is that it survived. Because it's been going since 1967 and it has no rules, it has no organisation, and it comes and goes, but it's really been quite successful. And whether we could build on that, I'm not sure. But what we certainly could do is, I think, perhaps, and it would be nice to thank the British Computer Society for making available the facilities here. And Peter, as we all have to say particular thank you, I think, for the meals they produce, which we probably could. Because we could start inviting a number of people. We mentioned Craig Fenton. I mean, he is, you were saying, larger than life. Well, that's true. And when Dan Bennett came over a year ago to give a presentation at the Royal Institution, we had people waiting in the street, hoping that there might be a space over, and we were completely full. And all sorts of members of the RI were pulling strings to say, can you find a space for me? Because he has such interesting things to say. Now, between us all, we can easily organise over the next few months, years, a whole series of people. I mean, in this, we mentioned half a dozen people, and some or other that publish various papers of things, and we can invite them all to come. We don't have to organise anything too serious. Tony Grading has suggested that he would be delighted to help. As you know, started the new College of the Humanities, and earlier today there were a number of the students from Chung. So they should have thought there wasn't, when they invented the name, was that the best shortened version, but not for me to say. Perhaps they should have had a PR man and help them get the name right. But because, interestingly, of course, the National, New College of the Humanities, they're not computing people. They're not necessarily scientists. They're not necessarily biologists or whatever. And I think those people have an enormous contribution to make. Because there are going to be a lot of very, very interesting problems to solve over the next 20, 30, or 50 years. And the more that the faculty, this way the general public know about these issues, rather than what they get fed in the press or whatever, the better. I think the debate, recent debate in the last few days, about whether or not we can play around with genes and that sort of thing, was very encouraging, because as you well know, it's been vetoed in certain large country across the Atlantic. It's always very sad when a nation vetoes scientific research. I'm greatly relieved that we didn't. Sorry, answer your question. I think what we'll try and do is just to set up an informal group, and every now and again organise, hopefully, for some of the people who are pushing out frontiers to come and talk to us. I know that certainly with someone like Craig Fenton, the RI would be absolutely delighted if he came and gave a presentation to them. Because I'm trying to entertain people to dinner and that sort of thing. And maybe we can put a group together with the cybernetics specialist group. You'll be amused to hear that Peter's thought it might be a good idea to update the name so it was slightly more in line with things in the British Computer Society said, we can't possibly do anything like that, it's far too radical. So I think we're still stuck with the same name, actually.
Well, we're going to argue about it.
Yeah, well, set up a committee.
Well, they said somebody's apparently got a copyright.
So we've got a copy.
Whether we call whether we use this name or another. So I would have thought that we've got three groups there that we could invite a series of people to come and talk to us on the general subject of convergence. Seems to be a word that attracts people's attention. So let's use it until such time as we come up with something better. And let's see where it leads us. Yeah. There is one thing to mention, and that is that we got such a reaction. And a big thank you to the British Computer Society again, and to the company that, as you probably know, the BCS has a joint company with the Oxford University Press. The only reason I know about it is that I negotiated it. And we were grateful to them for publishing this, which might be argued to be slightly out of the ordinary. Great, it's generated a lot of interest, and as a result, Max and I wrote a follow-on paper. The only trouble was it was so long that they couldn't publish everything that long, so it's been divided into 4. And the first one, there's the spring copy of IT now is at the press. I think it'll be on the street in the next few weeks. So the first article is in there. The second article we've got to pass on. I must find out when the deadline is. Max has written the third, and we've got a 4th one coming on this general subject, which we much appreciate. IT now publishing it. So that's one concrete thing that will happen. And if we can organise something, whether it's with the British Computer Society, with the Real-Time Club, whether it's the new College of the Humanities, or all the above, we'll see. And possibly the Oxford Martin School, that many of you will know. Was it James Martin, left Oxford University, I think something like 100 million a few years ago.
This is a technologist, the IT technologist?
Yes. And Ian Golden, who was until recently, the number 2 at the International Monetary Fund, runs it at the moment. And he came down to give a presentation at the Real-Time Club. And we might do something with him. One of the books out there is also by one of his colleagues. So there are quite a lot of people who are interested. My feeling is that we don't want to do an awful lot of organisation. I think we'd be better if we organise and spend our efforts on trying to attract. We just need people who want to talk to us. Anyone who would like to help, well, we'd be delighted.
We are.
Everybody.
You would know. If we wanted to help, who would we?
If you get in touch with me, I'm in touch with everyone else, or with Peter, I'm very loath to spend too much time, take up too much of Max's time, because he's got a PhD to get through, and I think that really ought to take priority. Aidan is in a gap year, which means he's got nothing to do. Isn't that roughly right, Aidan? Pretty much. The only trouble is he's going off to university. But I'm hoping that he'll be interested in helping, and I usually really my great nephew who's sitting at the back, who only came today because otherwise he'd be out of favour, so he had to come. Isn't that roughly right, Chris?
It's not at all true.
But, and anybody else who would like to be involved?
Well, I mean, could we do something more organised, like say, the BCS has got a thing called student chapters.
Yes.
Not quite sure. Could we try the people who are interested in these things in this room try and get together, and we from our side on the cybernetic machine group could try and propose a programme for starting in September with a number of presentations. And if anybody's got any ideas of people, but they would be perhaps evening meetings with where students got together. There was a talk by somebody intended mainly for students, or students talking to us, because that's really quite interesting. I mean, Max has told us what he's doing, and I'm not sure that any of us were all that aware of the kind of things that were going on. And that's what we found in the Pathfinder project.
Absolutely.
When we set it up, nobody knew there was anything going on in Europe. And when it came to, there were laboratories here and laboratories there, all beavering away, weren't there?
Yes, that's true. How many people got involved in that quantum thing there were about?
Well,
There must have been there were around a dozen people in Europe.
Yes, yes.
And I don't know whether...
I mean, there were several hundreds at the
Oh,
Helsinki meeting.
Oh, well, that's true. We went to the, we set this up with the guy from Brussels. I'd done a budget. And I put some money in for translation. And was roundly told off at the first meeting, as you may recall. They said, what's all this about? So I thought, we're English, we don't speak any foreign languages. We thought we needed it all translated. They said, you must be mad, we all speak English. And then every single person, and we had to hold the meeting in Helsinki, didn't we? Because the European Commission said it was Finland's turn.
We had to hold the meetings of the Pathfinder Committee
Yeah.
in practically every big capital in Europe.
We had a conference.
That was, you know,
We had a conference.
If you didn't hold it in Paris, then, you know, or Vienna, or it was Innsbruck.
We had to hold
Paris,
conference
Innsbruck.
that did a peer reviewed what we'd done.
I think we went to Copenhagen as well.
And wherever, I don't think here on so because it was Finland's turn, according to the European Commission, to have conference. So, well, we didn't mind. But the best bit of the English language thing, which might make you smile, was that Brian Oakley, and I'm sure many people know him, a hell of a nice guy, Mr. Chairman, who wrote the paper. And a very well-known professor who should be saying that edited it, corrected his grammar. Whoops. It's the only time I've seen Brian Oakley cross. Sorry about that. Somebody said to me the other night, probably by anecdote.
But I mean, if all the people who are at the moment informally here are interested, kept in touch.
Yes.
And each of them thought of some things that one could do.
Yes.
I mean, this is quite a nice place to meet, isn't it?
Yes.
And if this is accounted today as a success by the BCS, then perhaps we could repeat it for this.
In fact, could I ask everybody if they would, perhaps, if you wouldn't mind, Peter, if some of you could come back to Peter with how you felt the day went. Tell us the good bits, and you can lead off the bad bits, if we can work that out. And let's do just that and make it happen. I would suggest actually that we don't ever ask anybody's permission, because they're bound to say no. So I suggest we just go ahead.
No, but say if we put this in, we could perhaps even get them to give us a small grant, and that's all we need. No, they do this, and when they do that, then to some extent the room comes.
Yes.
The room comes more or less free.
Yes.
So that would solve the thing, place to meet, and if they saw that people were regularly turning up and they were involved, students, and some of them occasionally joined the BCS.
Yeah.
And it caused a bit of a stir.
Well, I'm hoping that these 4 articles will carry on a little bit and help. But Peter, I'm sure on behalf of everyone here, repeat myself, but I would be very grateful if you would thank the British Computer Society on behalf of the
Peter said that he did want to write. He wondered if we could write up a little bit about it today.
You write something up on it.
Yes, but specifically to thank them on our behalf.
But I mean to write something up about the meetings.
By all means, but I think
And they have the opportunity next week when we have the Treasurers' meeting.
Be wonderful. And I'd be inclined to write to, the politics of the British Computer Society much better than me, but it wouldn't be very harm to write to the Chief Executive and the President and all the other people, because about 60 team, Chris, and something, and say how much we appreciated it.
Yes, I think we should do that.
And write up, I think, would be extremely valuable. And we will, of course, have a list of all the people that came, and obviously we can circulate it, and let's see who would like to participate.
Well, I mean, you can ended up by saying that people thought of in general that it was a good thing that could be continued to the society's advantage in the future. And you provide the sort of entrepreneurial spirit and.
Well, the real-time couple certainly puts limited.
Sure, Mike is.
And loves it. And very happy to do that. I'd certainly like to keep everyone in touch with, if we can move this forward with the new
Chance.
chance. Yes, new chance.
No, I just love the word.
I know.
It's amusing.
Because AC grading would, from my point of view, I'd like him to be one of the first people who came to speak to it. But I think it's valuable to both the Real-Time Club and the British Computer Society to involve the undergraduate community.
Yes.
Because the average age of the British Computer Society seems to be sort of rising instead of...
Yes, we've always found that at a lot of these meetings, some of the best parts of the meeting are the informal parts, where people just talk together and compare notes face to face and in little groups.
Absolutely. Well, it's, we're a little bit early, but I don't think that's too much harm. Anybody, any other questions at all? Please.
I'm exceeding my ration, but I do have one question for Max. It's sort of in the, what you might call the public domain, the feeling about science is it's still more or less materialistic. Okay? If we include fields in materialism, right?
If we include
fields.
Yeah.
It's well known maybe with the people who study alternative therapies and stuff like that, that there are fields around human beings. They are often regarded as ordinary electromagnetic fields, and sometimes they're woo-woo things. If we say your group, the group you're in, materialistic with fields included in that definition. Remember Peter Rowlands talked about when he was connecting with somebody else, and he waved his head and said, "That's the rest of the universe, and this is the extended skin," right? So now, your monkey-to-monkey experiment. Why plug them together physically, materialistically? Why not work through the field? You see what I'm getting at?
I know what you're getting at, yeah. I'd be keen to discuss over drinks in the time that we have what you mean by fields. I have a rough idea, but I think with that kind of thing you need to be very careful actually to define what you're talking about before you can properly grasp the concept. I think
what I'm actually getting at is that there's a sort of underlying feeling that there's a paradigm shift away from materialism. I'm not quite sure what non-materialism is, but it's sort of linked to fields of information, right? In a way I'm asking indirectly, do you feel that your group is still stuck in classical mechanics, or is it trying to make a paradigm shift in the way it thinks about stuff?
So in the same way that you're not sure exactly what this departure from materialism, your words, not mine, would mean, I don't think, although I'll definitely agree that that kind of thing is a possibility, I don't think I know what it means enough yet to talk in terms of a group being stuck with an old idea or moving on to a new one. I think your perspective comes, perhaps, I'm going to venture to say, from physics, where there's a much clearer distinction between this idea of like materialistic theorems and
Why don't you choose a language of some
Yes. And in my language, although I don't like the idea that different sciences should have different languages, it's probably a universal one. In my language, they're kind of one and the same thing. If you want to talk about a specific instance of a specific kind of non-materialistic phenomenon, then I'd be interested to know what it was. But in general, I think taking materialistic in the way that I think you're using the term, the stuff that isn't materialistic is just the stuff that at the moment we don't understand or can't explain. I wouldn't go so
That's
far
why I
as...
specifically mentioned the electromagnetic field theory, which we do understand.
Yes, but not within the context of
Well,
living
you
organisms.
don't fully understand the problem.
Now you're right on the topic. I
And
believe that knowledge in the world, not necessarily here in Europe or the UK, but certainly in Russia, this is well understood and taught at undergraduate level.
really, I'd be interested to talk about the specifics because I think
Okay.
we might again be
But
discussing
I mean,
the
I think we are now in communication.
essence of the question, which do I think there's some kind of totally unexplained telekinetic type way in which we could connect organisms? No. Do I think we could transfer information electromagnetically? From what we know, probably not. But I'd be fascinated to hear any kind of more results or more info on that. At the moment, is the way that we currently have of connecting neural networks and different organisms the best way? Also, definitely not. It's not the best way. Whether there is a way or whether the best way would be wireless, my intuition still says no, but I don't know. And I think I'd love to be open to that. Did you have?
The second you open the idea of connecting a brain to something else wirelessly, assuming that you could interact with the brain from the wireless perspective, doesn't that open a whole kettle of fish for, at the extreme end, brain hacking?
Sure.
As in, if you had, I know it sounds ridiculous, but if you had some sort of, neuroprosthetic for the hypothalamus, so I mean, you had memory banks. I mean, through some very complex surgery installed in your brain, you could create artificial memories. You could have this old Cold War fear-mongering of the idea of a complete sleeper agent, the idea of someone who doesn't know anything about this past life and can be activated at a moment's notice. You could create this out of anyone who is connected to this wireless network.
I think that's an incredibly fascinating idea. And for a long time, maybe biology has shied away from the stuff I was alluding to earlier because people have thought of it as a bit like hocus pocus, that organisms might be connected in ways that we don't understand non-physically. Let's put that aside for now and say that with the help of electronics, they definitely can be. There are people walking around on the streets of London with wireless drug delivery devices inside them, or indeed wirelessly controlled pacemakers, or wireless neural implants. And I mean, those are really cool, but even cooler, also scarier, is the possibility that you can hack it.
GCHQ wanted to hear talking about where to pick up who was making those stuff.
You say the communication, you don't see it. Now, I wanted to go back on it because where do you think you are connected and how do you think you are connected to the rest of the world if you're saying, no, we don't want to deal with the non-material? Because I would put that in the non-material. So if you're saying you're not connected, that sort of doesn't agree with anybody in the room somehow. I'm not having a go at you, I'm just trying to look at that position.
I think, again, we really need to be clear what connected means. I don't think it's correct to assume that because information is in one place and matching information is in another place, there must be some form of active connection between them. I think in the sense that organisms as computers, as entities belong to a larger population, and that there are properties of that population, which are emergent properties that exist only because of the things that make up the population, yes, we're all kind of connected. But I know of no evidence, which is why I'm reluctant to posit that kind of I'm somehow connected to Charles directly in a way that we don't know. I might be, but I just don't know, is what I'm saying. I don't know why I would be. Sorry.
Well, I mean, that's the kind of, if you have this thing together and we have a fairly diverse population of people here, it doesn't have to be a formal topic at all. It's just a question that will keep coming up. And if it gets a little bit of discussion, and finally we might actually come to some conclusions about it. We could say that we're all in quantum superposition together in some particular sense, say, for example. Whether you can actually make use of that for any kind of communication, quantum mechanics basically says no, it doesn't.
It's again a question of whether the properties of the constituent parts become a property of the whole system.
But it's certainly one of the open questions of the kind of things we're talking about. How, when a population is together, does it have properties that are more than the sum of its parts? Because living systems almost certainly do, don't they? You can take all the bits and you can take all the bits of a bicycle and you put it together and you've got a bicycle. But you can't take the bits of a human being together if they've been apart and put them together and get a human being. But you might be able to do that as you said, with a living cell.
And I mean, to me, by extension, perhaps one day we will be able to do the same thing with humans. I think mechanistically, I don't see why not. I don't think there's a magic ingredient.
Well, bear in mind we're talking about quantum mechanics. And I think this. I think that when Feynman thought of it, I don't know if you ever read his 1962 paper, which is always Richard Feynman. It's a paper he wrote in 1962 at Caltech called "There's Always Room at the Bottom." Which is rather speculating that things can happen in the quantum mechanical domain, and there's a massive things that you can actually do there if you can work out how to do them.
Sure, there's so much left to work out.
Yeah, but his papers, well, anything that Feynman writes is well worth reading. Well, I think we probably have to, because I'm not sure what happens about switching off and things like that. Do you?
Oh no, I don't know. I've actually got one last thing to ask. You mentioned a few times that you wouldn't. There's no way of describing an idea of two people being connected, and it's completely unquantifiable and a bit nonsensical. However, within the last 3 years, the Oxford Martin School found that in the cytoplasms of certain cells, all of the molecules that they observed had very similar quantum states. They were unified in a way that they shouldn't have been. There should have been a relatively equal distribution of all the different behaviours of each of the molecules, which implied that there was some unknown force, as of yet, linking them bottom up. And they're using this to try and describe sort of bio-inspired quantum computer, because at the moment we have to entangle one, then the other, then the other. We've managed about 3 bits so far, which isn't very much data. But if you could get an entire cell's worth of particles, you could have a top-down system, and you could have a quantum computer in a year compared to 100. But the fact that all of the molecules within the cytoplasm of this cell that they observed had similar quantum states, and that they've observed, actually, it was mentioned earlier, to do with photosynthesis, there was something to do with that quantum criticality must have played a part in evolution, the way in which electrical behaviour throughout it lends some credence to the idea that there is definitely something that we don't understand. That even if it's not intercellular, even if it's in between organisms, definitely within a certain organism there are actions that we don't understand, which means we could posit that there is a potential for some sort of quantum interaction between, for example, you and Charles, even if we couldn't describe it or posit it mechanistically as of yet.
I think in any case there'd be nothing to stop us positing it, which is why I think everything you say is true. What goes on to make everything you say interesting is that there is, you're right, some evidence. In focus systems we brought up before, yes, there's definitely some kind of entanglement there. We might not understand it, but we know that it plays a part. And my position would be to say, why shouldn't it play a part? If it's a physical process, if it's kind of a fundamental thing that exists, then there's no reason evolution shouldn't have kind of co-opted it along the way. I think what I'd want to stress is that I don't think we gain anything by saying there's a material world and magic. There's a material world and the stuff that we don't understand yet.
Yes, there's no magic.
And you know, kind of 50 years ago, we barely understood genetics, and that could have just been put in the magic slot back then, and we never found out about it. But I'd rather say, you know, these phenomena that might underlie the incredible kind of cytoplasmic coherence in cells, we will understand one day, and that never has to be magic as such. There is no distinction. It's just there's a lot yet to find out. Yeah.
Peter, wasn't there was a very interesting work, was it Froelich?
Oh yes, Froelich and his work on quantum coherence.
And his work on quantum coherence is, if you want to read about some really scientific stuff, read some of Froelich's papers, because I think they're quite well regarded.
Yeah, they are.
I think my view would be, I like the idea of putting it into the specials, because I think one of the things that we're running into is the language, the alphabet, whatever we want to go and call it, in today's quantum is not descriptive enough. So maybe putting it into a special bucket allows us to change the language set, or we may be restricted to some of the quantum. I'm not sure.
I suggest it applies to be saying the consciousness. We've got the language is too small.
Yeah.
Good.
Well,
Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.
And let's see where it takes us. If you drop a stone in a pond, you never quite know what the effect will be. And let's hope we produce a tsunami. Anyway.
Well, I mean, we
Peter, thank you very much for coming to
continue
these.
this only over the next year, just meeting occasionally and getting an interest into all these topics after 1 or 2